Hello and welcome to Outward, Slate's podcast where we discuss all the glitz and the glamour from Hollywood to New York City and everywhere in between, and all other places. Not actually trying to stake any geographical claims here. This is a podcast medium. I am your host, Jules Gill-Peterson, and I'm really excited. Today we have just such an exciting interview. I was so thrilled to get the chance to sit down and talk with the extraordinary Trace Lysette, actor and star in the film Monica, which is just finishing up a pretty memorable and important awards season. Trace was kind enough to join us to sit down and talk about that wonderful film, which is available to stream now, as well as some of the real nitty-gritty questions about how we move past a pretty simple conversation around trans representation and talk about what it would really mean for trans women to succeed in and outside the entertainment industry. So we'll take a short break, and when we come back, my conversation with Trace Lysette. And we're back. Trace Lysette stars in Monica, a stunning drama from filmmaker Andrea Palaoro that had its world premiere at the Venice International Film Festival in 2022 and has since been rightly racking up critical acclaim and accolades. The film follows the protagonist, Monica, who's living on her own in LA when she gets an unexpected phone call from her estranged family asking her to come home to help care for their ailing mother, who's suffering memory loss as part of her illness. And the film chronicles Monica returning to the Ohio town and home from which her mother expelled her as a teenager for being trans. Part of what's so gripping to watch is that Monica's mother doesn't recognize her as an adult when she is re-encountering her. And the film earned a ton of Oscar buzz in the lead up to this year's ceremony, and Lysette used that platform to have some, I think, long overdue words about the way that Hollywood and entertainment more broadly like to capitalize on firsts in the industry without really acknowledging just how much work goes into achievements like that, or what their legacy will be if real material change doesn't follow. To witness a trans woman take the lead in a film like Monica and be considered for an Oscar, which is an award that a trans person, at least out, has yet to receive, is ultimately the result of so many years of hard work, including from Lysette, who was an executive producer on the film, and as listeners know, has had a storied career from roles on television in Transparent and Pose, to what I think was a very memorable performance in Hustlers also. Lysette's performance in Monica was nominated for an Independent Spirit Award for Best Lead Performance. And just the night before we sat down to record this episode, Monica won the GLAAD Media Award for Outstanding Film in Limited Release at a ceremony in Los Angeles. So really capping off a momentous award season, Lysette was also honored with the Groundbreaker Award at the Queer Teas. And I just want to say, look, I'm going to say this up front. I'm a Trace Lysette superfan, so I'm going to also admit I have a few goosebumps with what I'm about to say right now, which is welcome to Outward, Trace, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, that was such a sweet intro. Thank you so much. It's nice to talk to the community. It's nice to be on a platform with another trans person.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah.
I love to hear that. I mean, I wanted to start by just talking to you about the film, about Monica. And, shout out to listeners. It is available to stream, so go and watch it if you haven't already. I wanted to ask you about your performance because, oh my gosh, I mean, it's so bracingly intimate. And I'll say it struck a chord that at times was so personal for me that I was kind of speechless after I watched it for the first time. And so I was sort of curious if you could share a bit about how you actually approached the acting. There's this, what I think is almost it's a beautifully painful contrast that you're animating and exploring in the film. We get to watch, this grown trans woman who has worked so damn hard, I think we can sense, to build a life for herself, and ease in her body, but really this kind of independence that nobody was ever going to give her. And yet, we meet her, and Monica, particularly around other people, is really quiet. You know, she doesn't come back home to Ohio with like a big agenda to set old wrongs right or confront her mother, confront her brother. She's almost never angry when she has every right to be. And I kind of got the sense that Monica is sort of like practiced at holding things so deep under the surface that there's only ever so much she can reveal. And so your performance is honestly like a masterclass in, I don't know, like the intensity of understatement. There's so much subtlety to your expressions, the way you hold your posture, the softness of your voice. And I would just love to hear about like, how did you approach that? How did you put together that kind of performance? How did you prepare this sort of incredible repertoire in a film that's fairly light on dialogue and I think really shows us the power, like the sheer power of understatement? So like, yeah, how did that kind of come together initially for you? And what was it like to try and embody that?
Well, in a nutshell, I just tried to find the truth. I know that sounds really simplified, but that really is acting in a nutshell and just getting to that place where you feel comfortable enough with your instrument and with your research and your life experience that you don't have to reach for the performance or reach for the drama or the comedy or whatever. Of course, there's certain projects where you do have to be bigger, but this wasn't that. This was deeply internal but strong. And I knew that I had to rely on my own life experience and the experience of my best girlfriends who are trans and how we navigate the world and that quiet strength that I see in trans women every single day. Because the dialogue just wasn't there, there wasn't room for like a false moment. And so I really had to kind of just zero in on Patricia and what she was bringing. And she's very primal and emotional and just raw, and that fed me as well. So I could do only what needed to be done and nothing extra. I've lived this trans life for a couple of decades now. And I guess what I mean by that is like, you know, I started my transition in my late teens. And so most of my life has been existing in this trans experience. Right? Like, with the exception of like little boyhood, which it was what it was, but like most of my life has been navigating the world as a trans person in a trans body. And a lot comes with that. And so I've navigated situations where I had to hold my tongue or exercise restraint with people I cared about and people I didn't care about and everything in between. And so I think I just kind of brought all of that because sometimes what we see in TV and film is just so much bigger than it actually is in real life. And I didn't want to do that.
Mm,
I didn't want to do that. I wanted it to feel as real as possible.
mm. You know, I love the way you put that because that was what I think almost like, I don't know, it's so weird to say I'm going to use this word ironically, like that I was shocked initially starting the film. Shocked as in like, I'm so used to how culture has fixated on trans women in particular as spectacles, as theatrical. And that's not to say that we are not necessarily practiced in the arts of theatrical living. Of
Right.
course.
Oh, yeah.
But like, you know, often that's very public, often that intersects with work, you know, and often
Yeah.
it's been a kind of bargain that trans women, in order to get things they need, in order to get paid, have, you know, had to under constraint, you know, given a little bit more of that performance. And there was something so intense about the privacy, the
Mm,
quietness, and the way that like Monica, you know, she never tells us on screen or tells another character exactly what she's thinking. And so we get so much information, but it's visual information. It's
mm,
emotional. It's so subtle. And I just felt like, I don't know, it just felt like a bit of a tidal wave, you know, in terms of
mm,
the way I've ever seen, yeah, a trans woman on screen before. Part of what you're saying, right, is like, it's not that one's public self is real or less real than a private self, but just we never see that private self. We never see those quieter moments. I think it serves the public's imagination of trans women to think that we're always aggressive and we're always taking action and we're always loud and present and that we're always like in some way angry or emotional. And the idea that I think really rang true for me, even though my life was nothing like this character's, was like, oh, at some point to survive, sometimes you make a deal that you're just not going to enter anger anymore.
mhm.
You're just like, I can't. If I
Yeah,
do, the whole world will end. Do you know what I mean? Or my world will
absolutely.
end. I don't know. It's so interesting to hear you say that in that sense, like tapping into this was about just like honesty and almost like, I don't know, did that feel almost like relaxing into a performance more than having to push it outward or express it? I'm just sort of curious, like how did that, I don't know, I'm not an actor, so I don't know how that always feels.
I had to always make sure I was in the right place in my head. Like I was thinking about the right thing that would elicit the right emotion, even if I wasn't talking. So I couldn't really phone anything in, even when I wasn't talking. And I think that thankfully the audience could feel that. But when you speak about anger, yeah, I talked about that at the Queerty Awards, about how I spent my 20s and 30s so angry at the world for things that I went through in my youth. And I guess I focused a lot on the cards I was dealt in those 2 decades. And then I got to a place where I was like, that's just not sustainable. To do that is to also disregard all these other beautiful things that I was given, right? I don't want to live the rest of my life angry. And a lot of that, I see a lot of that in Monica too. Sure, she has every reason to be angry or come home and be this tornado or whatever, have a reckoning. But for what? Like,
Right.
how much time is left? I don't know. I mean, for her mom, for her, like for her nephew, is that what you want to do with it? I don't know. I feel like she's had enough time to process everything with her family so that when she does come back, she knows who she is, she knows where her strength is, and can still be a little messy, and she's figuring things out. She knows at her core who she is. And those quiet moments are some of my favorite moments, when she's getting out of the tan bed, walking to the car, getting catcalled. Like, I can't even tell you how many times I've had to deal with situations like that in my life. And
Mm-hmm.
you're like, okay, is this going to get weird? Is he going to clock me? What's happening next? Like, sir, can you move, please? Thank you. Just, and how layered it was for us. And I'd speak to trans people who watch that scene and they're like, I got so nervous,
Right.
and then there's other who are just like, I think maybe it just went over their head, but,
Yeah.
like, I don't know. We didn't want to cater to the cis gays. We did a lot of things that just, I felt like raised the bar. Me and the other trans woman on set, Drew Gregory, we had this conversation with everyone on set about taking out the dead naming that was in there at one point. The collaboration piece was there. And so I was thankful for that, for those intimate conversations and those quiet moments that ended up in the film.
Oh, that's so interesting because, yeah, talking about raising the bar, right? I think one of the ways I've been paying attention to how, like, groundbreaking work how it gets celebrated has so often been on focusing.
I'm so interested to see your take on how this whole award season went and like, what did it look like for you as a trans person watching it all unfold? Because I know how it was being in the middle of a storm, but what was it like? You spoke about that in the intro too. Like, what was that like just watching it all happen and unfolding? Like, did you know all that we were up against, or, did you have expectations or not?
That's so interesting. I mean, thank you for asking me. Yeah, it's interesting. Like, I know enough people in the industry to have like a little bit, maybe more than the average viewer's kind of perspective. But I think like one of the things I was paying attention to is like, okay, we have been actually like marketed a narrative around progress equaling the literal representation on screen. One of the things that I was thinking going into this award season, first of all, I was like, my feeling about like when is a trans person going to win an Oscar, is kind of just like, yeah, when the fuck is that going to happen? Like we've been waiting, okay? like whatever year,
Right.
the first year is already way too late. So like that's not the win, right? Like the win is not just the win.
Right.
And so like when I saw that, that you were being put forward for consideration, I was like, oh, wait a minute. I have some sense of how hard it is to make an independent film. However, I have the sense that like making an independent film like Monica is probably even harder than making just the quote unquote average independent film. And I know you had, an executive producer role. I mean, I'm kind of curious to hear more about this because this was the thing that I feel like I came away with most interested in throughout this award season was actually about production. Maybe it's also because, of the strikes last year, thinking about the labor and the work that people do in the industry and how different working conditions there are for different groups of people. I mean, I'm kind of curious, like, especially also for listeners of this show, like, how would you describe like the challenges of getting an independent film like Monica made? But then like also, am I right in thinking like there's the challenge of just getting the thing made, right? And you just alluded to like one small
Mhm.
example, getting those dead names out of the script. But then once it's made, it's like, oh, then the challenges are just beginning because it's not just because a film has incredible on-screen storytelling that it's going to be recognized, right? Like that's not how it works, right? I mean, so I know there's a lot there, but I'm just sort of curious, like, what are the challenges that you feel are most important for people to know about, or that you feel most like passionate about talking about?
I think to people in the industry, it's not a mystery that like funding is the first piece. And with indie film, you'll hear people say things like, "Oh, it takes years," and it does. But like, and I really, it's painful to admit this, but Andrea did say on a panel once in New York that even though this was his third feature film, it was the hardest to get funded, and it's supposed to be easy. It's
With
supposed to
each
be
one,
easier
right? Yeah.
with each one.
Hmm.
And it took, I don't know, 6 years or something to get it all funded. It was only $1.7 million budget, which is not,
That's small
that's still a very
for a
small, it's
feature.
almost very
Yeah.
small. The critical acclaim we got for a film this size is pretty great, but the challenges would be funding first. Anna Paquin was supposed to be my sister until she had to exit due to a family emergency. And then we had to attach bigger names and get the funding. And I would say making the film was equally as tough as the journey that came after the film was locked. We did get into Venice, which was a big early win. And then I got to Venice and realized there's two very, very different Venice
Hmm.
experiences. I mean, you pull up in the boat and you're seeing billboards for Tar and Blonde.
Right.
And I'm like, is there one for Monica? Like my naive ass is looking for our poster,
Well, there
right?
should have
I'm
been.
like, oh, we all, I'm like, oh, we
Yeah,
all
yeah,
get a
yeah.
poster. Where's,
Yeah, yeah.
where's ours? Like a little kid, I could cry. And I was pulling up in the boat and I was like, oh, oh, they probably paid for those. And I just remember thinking that, like, oh, okay, cool,
They're
cool,
not
cool.
given, they're
Um,
purchased. Right. Yeah.
that was the start of the realization for me, September 2022. Of course, then, if I'm on a roller coaster and that's a little dip, then we premiere and we get the 11.5 minute standing ovation, which was the longest of the festival that week up until that time. And so so the roller coaster goes back up. And then, and the next day, no one writes about it. Right. And so the roller coaster goes back down and they're writing about Spitgate with Harry Styles and Chris Pine. And that was the story that day. And no one wrote about the fact that this trans film was making history and had the longest,
Huh.
whatever. And so I was like, oh, okay, cool, cool, cool. Like, it's cool, dust it off. Um, and that was the tone that was kind of like the journey the whole time. It was that and then waiting for distribution, and we didn't get offers right away until months later. And then we were told, if you make some performance best of lists, we will we'll consider funding your awards campaign. And then we did make some lists, and then we didn't get funded, and we had to do our fundraiser ourselves. And so it was just this nonstop roller coaster. And at some point, I had to say, wow, Trace, you won't survive this if you invest this much. So you got to like check out a little bit and show up, but check out. Check out with your heart, check in with your head. And that's what I did. That's how I got through this. Um, because all of the chatter and the buzz, the Oscar buzz, you can't feed into it. You just can't. Um, I'll be happy and glad if, um, my next job comes soon and to me, that's the win. It's because would an award guarantee that? Sure, it probably would. And that's why we gave it our all. But, because it's so much bigger than this one film. it's everything that comes after this film, you know, for the other trans filmmakers that are trying to get their shit funded. And it really just shouldn't be this hard,
Right?
but it
No, it
is.
shouldn't. But I think like it's so, I really appreciate that. I mean, because I feel like, okay, everyone knows applause don't pay the bills, but like that doesn't necessarily mean people have, uh, the industry has changed a lot, right? Like one thing I was just thinking while you're talking is like, part of what's really weird is this moment for trans representation, right? This
Mhm.
moment of cultural visibility actually is coinciding with a huge restructuring of film and television, both like corporate
Yeah.
consolidation, which and like this the shift, TV becoming the sort of prestige thing and streaming completely reshaping, for example, award season. But in part what that means is like
Hmm.
the very moment where like the industry is saying okay to some trans content is the exact moment where you need more money than ever to actually
Hmm.
leverage recognition or celebration into tangible success and careers, right? And I think there's a
Yeah.
way that like the sort of triumph narrative of representation, whether or not people really believe in it or not, I think plenty of people are skeptical of it. It still just doesn't acknowledge all of those, those questions that are like just bread and butter. It's about having a job. I know you've talked in other interviews about like keeping health insurance, It's like why were people on strike last year? I mean, it's not like, do you know what I mean? Like
Right.
this is about livelihood. This is not just about making art, right? It's also about your work, your labor.
Yeah. Oh, it's not about a fucking
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
trophy.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
like it's about it's about the fact that
Hmm.
like I mean, I would like to buy a house
Yeah.
one day,
Right?
like in my mid 40s, like, or take care of my
Mm-hmm.
mom because she's in her 70s. Like, uh, or yeah, and it's so embarrassing to have to talk about it
Mm-hmm.
over and over because I know that we're worth so much more than
Yeah.
this. And, maybe this is the end of it. Maybe I need to like check myself in how much I talk about this stuff, but um because I don't want to live in this space forever, this like scarcity kind of space. I feel like talking about all this it's been cathartic, but like I need to at some point put it down and let it go and pass the torch and let someone else talk about it. But it is a sobering reality that it is so much bigger than a pat on the back or fucking ego boost for us. Like when it comes to, yeah, the awards conversation or whatever, it is just, it's so much deeper because it trickles down into the lives of the girl standing on the corner turning a trick still, like and I think there's a disconnect with the general public about how we're represented in the media and like the everyday trans sex worker that is still out there hustling and not on TV and what all of that, how that connects. I mean, we see it with these assholes in their comedy specials and shit. Like, like, do you not understand how you're affecting that girl standing on the corner? Do you not fucking get it? Like, I get so angry. Like, uh, because it's like, I don't understand how you think it's just jokes. It's not just jokes. Um,
Right.
I know I'm all
No,
over the
now you're
place, but
not. No, because like I think like one of the things I was thinking, right? It's like so there's this way that the culture of celebrity and also just like the American culture of wealth, it's all about denying how much you really have.
mm,
It's all about the fantasy that it's effortless, that you're just being rewarded for your natural talent. You just happen to have millions of dollars or a mansion or like, who knows? You just happen to have the billboards in Venice, right? We don't want to think about where they came
right,
from, right? We don't want to talk about
right,
this as work
right.
because like if you reach this certain fantasy level, this breakaway level of wealth, then you get to pretend it's not work anymore. Then it's suddenly just a
Yeah.
vocation. It's just a craft. It's just an art, right? And it's like, I was thinking, I think being able to go out on the circuit and even around the Oscars and talk about this as work, to talk about it as labor, I kind of think that's something that only a trans woman would really have the courage to fully do. Because like trans women have been
Mm,
made over time or historically to like be able to sell fantasy. Like that, like we understand how to do, we know how that works inside out. Like no one pulls anything
Right.
over us because we're like, oh honey, like that's so nice that it took you 40 years to perfect your fantasy. Like we figured this out when we were teens, or like, when I was 10, I knew how to
Yeah.
manipulate adults, right? It's like, because I had to. So there's something about like what it means, I think, particularly, I think you were just talking about this, right? Why does representation matter, right? It's not so much about the content. Part of it is about what happens when you have trans people in the writing room, on the production staff, on set, on screen, able to, bring everything that they know and both start to mess with everyone else's beautiful little fantasies, right? And
Hmm.
flex some of that earned talent, but also what you were just saying, right? Have this real deep sense of like, no, but we know the relationship between what we see on screen and the people who are work in the corner, right? Like we have witnessed that, or some of us have experienced that firsthand. So it's like, it's not just about like marginalized voices being let in, right? Like it's so real.
It's so
Yeah.
much deeper than that, especially for transsexual
Yes.
women.
Above
Like it is
all.
just, oh God, I wish they could
Mm,
understand what the average trans
mm,
girl goes through.
mm.
I really do, because God, it's like they miss it. Like I wish they could go live a day in the trenches. I mean, I think it would just change everything, because I see them trivialize our struggle sometimes. And that can be heartbreaking, because then they don't understand how important it is for us to see ourselves, or to see us being loved, or whatever the next chapter is, like after Monica. I mean, oh God, there's so many stories to tell. There's so many biopics to
Right?
tell. There's so much trans history to uncover, and we deserve it all. And that's why I don't know if waiting on Hollywood is the way to go. I think that, like, I shared Nyla Moon's short film the other day on my page, and I thought, yeah, I mean, we have to find ways to get our shit out there that maybe isn't on the biggest platform at first, because if they see the traction, look, this is a money business, this is a money game. And if they see the traction, if they see people really love what we're putting out, maybe we will then have our awkward Black girl moment, our insecure moment, where, we can get it made on a larger scale, like, take a page out of Issa Rae's book and do it that way. I don't know, but like trying to go the traditional route is so painfully hard. I sold a show a couple years ago to FX, and it got stuck in development for 2 fucking years. and
That's
like
outrageous.
and it was so personal, and it was a comedy based in trauma, and like you have to turn all your trauma into laughs, and you do all this, and then they don't greenlight your shit, and you're like, that's my life. Like, and it's so upsetting. So we got to find out another way, I think, to get our stories out there.
I love that. I mean, I was just thinking, right? It's like, in part, it seems like it's about becoming irresistible on your own terms first, but irresistible to everyone else to the
Mhm.
point where they're like, ah, damn, we're missing out on something. We gotta, right? And it's like, who knows better than how to become irresistible than transsexual women? That is like,
It's so
we invented
true.
it, I
We
think.
invented it, honey. We feel the fantasy.
Yeah. No, I really like that. And I think it seems like one of the real pieces of wisdom that, that you're able to, kind of hold in this moment, right? Is that like, well, if the goal at the end of the day is never just about like, yeah, the first trans film to do this or that, because it's going to take 100 years to exhaust that formula. If the real goal is not
Yeah.
the trophy, then it's like um you don't have to limit your imagination to those metrics of success or those avenues alone. And maybe that also is part of responding to what I think is so true, but also so hard to accept when you're like deep in an industry and also like beloved and recognized and
Mm.
celebrated, when you have to be like, I also cannot give my whole self to this. Because it's not like,
Yeah.
that's not something that you should have to ever consider, but also like for yourself. You do know what I mean? Like
Hmm.
you have earned, more than earned, the right to be, to be like, I can't put my heart and soul into this. I mean, I feel like that's such a hard, I just think like I don't know, yeah, for any, especially for trans women who have let's say, worked our ways into any professions that we are in. It's like, it's so, I find that part really hard, even in my day job, like not to feel consumed, because I'm like, I had to bust my ass to get here and I'm good at it. But I cannot let myself get caught up in that or it will eat me alive. Like, it's so hard.
Yeah, it is hard. You have to know that it is work at the end of the day. It's work that fulfills me. It's given me purpose in my life. I value it. I value it as, as much as anything in my life. But I also have to know that my family, my friends, my health, those come first. And yeah, my mental health is a part of that. And so I have to be careful. I also think the industry's just changed a lot. There was that article that came out with Sydney Sweeney in the Hollywood Reporter. Did you see that? Talking about, and then there was another article that broke it down. I forget what publication it was, but it broke down how she didn't come from money and that how, in order for her to maintain her lifestyle, she has to constantly do these posts on Instagram and branding deals. And she can't take 6 months off to have a baby. And it's like, well, if Sydney Sweeney's going through that, like, what does that mean for the rest of us? So yeah, I have to just zoom out sometimes and be like, no, life's good. I am happy to be doing this for a living. Because if you knew where I came from, you would say, God damn, that's a miracle. And yeah, I have to just keep in forward motion. And I do feel hopeful for whatever comes next, especially being in community with trans creators, because I see that starting to happen. And I'm just really looking forward to that.
Yeah, that seems like, oh, that's so wonderful. That does feel like what transformation would look like. It's like, I don't know, critical mass, right? Not just in front of the camera, not just a few people who have been given a broader green light, but like a groundswell, right? So that you could imagine a from beginning to end trans project that is successful on its own terms first, and then, also maybe commercially successful.
Yeah. Oh God, that's the dream.
Right?
Dana Davis and Candace Kane started this production company. I think Rain Valdez has one. And I'm like, oh, let's lean into that and let them get on board with us. Like, let Netflix come a calling. Let them come call us. Like, okay, we see you guys stirring the pot over here doing nice things. We want a little piece of that, wow, hello, let us amplify that. And so I think we have to do it for ourselves, and that might mean starting smaller, but I think that's the only way.
Yeah, no, I'm totally convinced by that. As one trans woman to another, as someone who's really looked up to you and appreciated your work over the years, like, thank you for being someone, really demonstrating that courage in so many complex ways in your career and in your work in the public limelight. And thank you also for being willing to break it down with me and talk about it, because I gotta say, it's pretty easy to be jaded about representation and about Hollywood, especially as like a viewer. And you really make these things come to life and feel dynamic and feel worth it, while also being, pretty real about what we should and shouldn't get wrapped up in. So Trace, I just can't thank you enough. This has been like an honor and a real treat.
Oh, thank you, Jules. It's been an honor for me too. I appreciate you.
Well, that's about all the time that we have for our show today. But before we go, just a reminder that we love your feedback. If you want to send that our way, send us some topic ideas, reach out with your advice questions or reactions to this and other episodes, you can always send us an email to outwardpodcast@slate.com, or hit us up on the old Facebook or X @Slate Outward. And just a reminder that if you want to join Slate Plus, you'll also get ad-free podcasts, extra segments on shows like Working, and you'll never hit a paywall on the Slate site. To learn more about all that, you can go to slate.com/outwardplus. Our show was produced by the incomparable Palace Shaw. And if you like Outward, please subscribe in your podcast app, tell your friends about it, and rate and review the show so others can find it. In the meantime, everybody, stay gay and see you next time.